It's 7 a.m. here at the lake, and you can see there's Hell's Gate behind me. One of my favorite things to paint here at Possum Kingdom Lake in Texas. So we're gonna do an early morning paint session here, and I'm just set up on a rock. I've just got a towel and a few supplies, pretty minimal today. I'm gonna stick with all my favorite paints and all my favorite supplies. Usually when you're on location, it's a good idea to just work with things that you know. So I'm gonna be using this long horizontal arch watercolor block. I think it'll work really well for the composition. If you look at the way the rocks are lit up right now, it's just so pretty. We've got that early morning sun hitting Hell's Gate on the left side. It's gorgeous. So let's give it a shot. I'm using my portable painter today. This is so nice when you're just sitting down and you don't have an easel or a desk to work with. You can just drape it over your leg. Also, it's so nice because these are your water canisters, so helps with stability, and it's all in one piece, which is great. So I always start with a sketch. I'm gonna set my paints aside while I'm sketching. The tricky thing about this composition is figuring out how far apart these two rocks are. It's really a comparison game. Maybe I start with 2 marks representing where I want my rocks to be and how much space should be between them. And then I decide on the size based on that. They're further apart than you almost think they are. And it's tempting to bring them closer together just because you want to change your composition, but you actually could if you want. And often I have brought them closer. I've painted this probably 3 or 4 times. And almost every time I bring them just a little closer together for the sake of the composition. So there's not such a wide gap in between. That said, it's not a complete perfect wide gap. We see some of the distant hill behind it, and then you decide how high up does the water go. After sketching these 2 monumental rocks, how high up does the water go before we bring in the landscape? I'm just working with basic shapes right now. Another thing I try to avoid is tangents. So this hill really pretty much touches the top of this rock. So I'm going to make it slightly lower, and I'm going to make the big rock in front slightly higher. That way there isn't a tangency right there. So there's my rough sketch. Thinking in terms of big shapes, I'm going to include this big cluster of plant life and trees, shrubby little trees at the top. And I'm trying to work fairly fast because the light's going to change very quickly here today. So what are the most essential things to get down? Probably the contour and shape of these rocks. It's such an iconic spot on this lake. I want to make sure I'm true to the character and nature of these rocks. There's a big crevice right here. I'm going to sketch that on. Kind of comes in and back, a little notch almost. And we see the horizontal lines of these big notches of the rocks underneath. Lots of color changes happening in the rocks. Focusing right now on proportion, size, placement. And then on the left side, we see some gray rocks that they're pretty much the same value as the green trees sloping up. I do want to capture the reflection of these rocks on the water. It's always a beautiful, spectacular thing to include. And the water is kind of bland right now. It's just a basic blue. I might change that up a little bit and just add some more movement to the water. I tend to like to leave out most of the buildings back here. I'm gonna change and adjust my hillside. I made it slightly too long. It's cutting in at the wrong spot. There's a sliver of sandy beach off in that distance. You can decide to include that or leave it out. These are all decisions you get to make as the artist. Okay, I think that's pretty much it for the sketch. It's pretty minimal. Might just include one more rock shape right here, big shadow. But aside from that, I think we're ready to start painting. Okay, I've got my rag. This is an Escoda size 12 round travel brush. These are not cheap, but boy, if you can get a good size travel brush, something that's large and holds lots of paint and water, it's gonna do you right. Let's start with the sky. I like to, in a sunrise sky, include a little bit of pink. So I'm gonna use some quinacridone rose, or what do I have in here? Alizarin crimson, my cool red in that sky. I'm gonna try to create a soft gradient from blue to pink to maybe even a little bit of yellow ochre. You often see these lovely gradients in skies. And I'm gonna start with wet on wet, bringing that into the trees as well. It's fun. There's a boys camp across the way, right across the lake. You can hear they're all waking up and doing their morning rituals. There's a loudspeaker. There's been mornings when I was out here painting, actually on top of Hell's Gate, and they were practicing their canoe skills, their rowing skills, working as a team in the lake. And they saw me up there and they said hi. It was fun to see that. All right, this is ultramarine blue. I'm gonna do a quick wash of this across the top. What I've just done is pre-wet the surface with water so I can get a nice flat, smooth wash. I'm gonna rinse that quickly and then switch. I think this is alizarin crimson. It's my cool red, whatever it is. Quinacridone rose, alizarin crimson, either one works. And of course, when it touches that ultramarine, it creates a really nice purple. And then I'm gonna switch to quinacridone gold, since I don't have yellow ochre. And bring that across the top. So yeah, we have a nice, lovely, muted gradient across our sky now. Pretty happy with that. While I have that quinacridone gold, I'm just gonna go ahead and paint in my landscape with a solid wash of color. That includes the central landscape in between the two big rocks and the reflection on the water. I can do this all in one pass. Bigger, broader washes work best. And this side is the one that's lit up in the sun. So the brighter your gold, the better. It's so pretty. There's always construction going on, so I'm hearing some signs of life, hammering, mourning doves, the lapping water. The best part about being out here is experiencing nature. Okay, another quick wash, ultramarine. And I have to work fast. I'm gonna let this touch my yellow, but not blend too much. Speaking of nature, we also get little bugs. That's my least favorite part of nature. You can see the value of a big brush when you have to get these washes in so fast. Okay, so I just covered the whole water, except for where I see my yellow reflections. That's gonna go darker. Not really yellow. Reflections of the rocks. So there's my start. I had to let my first wash dry a little bit. It's pretty wet. It's kind of humid here too. Not as dry as Colorado. So it takes a little bit longer for washes to dry. And it's not completely dry yet, but I think it's dry enough that I can switch to my smaller brush now and start painting in the rocks. The rocks are the most important thing to me in this painting. So I want to make sure I get it right. I say rocks, but it includes all of the greenery on top of those rocks as well. I'm going to start with whatever I think is going to change the fastest, and that is my sunlit rock. Got some cool greens on here. I think I might just mix up my green though, using Hansa Yellow Light and whatever dark I have on my palette. I think it's indigo. Yes. All right, so let's start with some trees to create the look of that golden light on top. I'm going to do some wet next to wet. This is my dark Start with that and then switch to Gamboge Nova. Gotta make sure I don't have too much water in my brush. Paint that right on top, using the tip of my brush to create scrubby tree texture. It's important not to make it too uniform, so I'm checking my shapes, trying to make sure I don't do any patterns or anything like that. And mix up a brownish gray. This, of course, can be accomplished with ultramarine and burnt sienna. I've got these little extra palettes that were added to my portable palette, and they work great if you just need a couple extra colors in there. So we're going to quickly block in the dark rock color. Oh, and I got a little spatter. I'll try to lift that out while it's still wet. Gosh, it's a nice day. Here I'm connecting it to that shadow shape. The dark gray color is almost the same value as the shadow. So we can just paint that all at once. And I'm also going to paint in this like darkish shape down here. Normally I don't encourage you to start dark, but I need to be able to see my midtones a little better. And so some of these darker values are going to give me a comparison stick to hold up my other values against. This is Hansa Yellow Light with a little bit of indigo or ultramarine mixed in. Looks quite nice for greens. I like to just kind of blob for my bushes, alternating between colors. Remember, we have to work quickly because lighting's going to change really fast. Once we have the main things in, then we can slow down a little bit. Okay, for that beautiful, brilliant orange on the rocks, this is Gamboge Nova mixed with a little cadmium red. Creates almost this peach color. And I don't want to work in tiny little pieces just yet. Got to try to block in the main thing, the whole solid golden sunlit rock. Getting some backwash here. Had a little too much water in my brush. Water control is one of the hardest things about working with watercolors. But the more you do it, the easier it gets. Just takes practice, logging your brush miles. You know, even those of us who paint all the time still sometimes mess it up. So hopefully that should make you feel better if you're still struggling with it. I'm dropping in little hints of that cadmium red, extra pops of color, playing up that sunlight, sunrise sunlight on the rock. Keep in mind, this is going to be one of my lighter values besides the sky. So all of this is going to go quite a bit darker. Just going to go ahead and add that color down below on the water. Yeah, quick block in. Pretty happy with that. Let's do the other side. This is going to be a lot darker. Over here, I can start with ultramarine burnt sienna. This side is starting to see a little bit of that sun-kissed light on the top, so I want to include that too. Extra red in there. It's fun hearing the music from the camp across the way. And then the shadow on the water, I'm going to connect that whole shape all the way across. And then switching to Gamboge Nova for a little of that golden light on the top. Connecting it to my green tree. So my block in, it's a little darker than the other side, but it's still going to need to go quite a bit darker to bring it up to the correct value. I'm going to switch back now quickly to my big brush, mixing up another mixture of blue. So we're going to need to darken our water. Just a second wash over the top for now. But on the second wash, I can start to carve out some lighter areas of the water by just avoiding them with my brush. So for example, here in the center between the two rocks, I see some light on the water. It's just brighter here. So instead of covering it all with that wash, I can avoid it with some streaky gaps. And in the foreground, broaden my brush strokes, make them big, wide, sort of feathered out. And now with just that additional color on the water, it's starting to look so much better. Okay, let's switch back to the small brush and start to paint our landscape. Oh, I got a little spatter on there. Oh wow. My perfect gradient sky, not so perfect anymore. That'll happen when you're working fast. Okay, so remember, one way to create atmospheric perspective is to make your background lighter in value and more cool in color temperature. So I'm gonna take a wash of, this is like Prussian blue, just right across my little hill back here. Normally I like to fuzz that out with wet and wet, but I don't really have time today, so I'm just gonna paint it in. Then I'll switch to a slightly more warm mix for the mountain that's overlapping, which means it has a little more yellow in it, less blue. Gonna just let it touch that blue. That will be a soft edge. And yeah, there's a couple buildings here. I can decide to include suggestions of those, maybe with a little bit of a brick red to represent the roof. Can you hear the music? I'm gonna try a little bit of red, suggesting some rooftops back here, the structures and the camp. All right, let's come back to the one on the left. Remember, this is the one I want to really capture the character and the essence of it. So we can begin carving out some more details now. We've blocked in the main thing, but it needs some darker darks to really make it stand out. The mix in my brush right now is indigo and burnt sienna, which creates almost black. It's pretty great for your dark darks. And I'm just observing the rock in front of me, looking at the cracks, the crevices, the overhangs, dark shadows right now. There's a big shadow right here. This is about the point where my butt starts to hurt. So no joke sitting on a rock. Now I'm trying to mix up kind of my orangey, honestly burnt sienna would probably work the best, orangey reddish color for a mid-tone shadow-ish. And I'm going to drop that in this shadow shape again. This is what I'm going to use kind of as the reddish tone on the underhanging of this big rock on the top. Probably don't know my correct rock terms. Definitely butchering that. Sometimes stability and just getting a good angle on your brush can be tricky when you're working out in the elements like this. And if you have to set your paints down because you feel like it's just wobbly on your lap, do it. Do whatever it takes to get a good, comfortable position where you feel like you can get some accurate brush strokes. I'm going to add some dry brush texture. I can hold my brush at an angle and just scrape it across the surface of the paper. Such an effective technique for rock texture. You know, just observe and make marks. Try to paint sort of intuitively. You know, you're thinking about what you're seeing and you're just grabbing colors that seem a match or feel appropriate based on what you're seeing. They don't have to be exact. I think a lot of us get fixated on trying to match exact color. It's really not necessary. The lighting has changed a little bit on my paper. I'm getting some dappled light now. but that's okay. It's just one of those things you have to work with when you're painting from life. So I've added some little dark details to this rock. I'm pretty happy with that. And now it's time to touch up the other side and maybe add some more to the water. And that's pretty much it. So, dark gray again, ultramarine, burnt sienna. Also noticing there's kind of a weird little gap right there. I might need to address that. Can pull some blues and greens in there. I just don't want that to draw too much attention to itself. It shouldn't be the lightest light in the painting, so covering that up a little bit. And you can also maybe add some more foliage details in here if you want. Once that's dry enough, of course. I say details, it's really just little blobs suggesting shadows. I do want this greenery back here to stand out, to make the rock stand out more, so I have to darken it. I'm just doing that with my gray combo. You can see just how the addition of a few little blobs back there really helps this rock in particular come forward more in space. Now I'm adding some dark shadows under my plants on the top of my rock on the right. Since they're in the sunlight, it's okay if you go a little more detailed on these. And now, starting to carve out the shapes on this rock. It's definitely a little more of a streak of sunlight here. You can include that, why not? To some extent, you don't want to chase the light too much, but I think here it looks really neat to have a little hint of that sunshine coming through. Now, just like on the other side, I want to put in some darks so I can use those as a measuring stick for my midtones. My darkest shadow is here, just next to this big crevice. There's a big bush right there. I'm taking Hansa yellow and mixing it in with the dark that's on my brush. Makes a really nice dark green. And then switch back to our gray that we mixed up. And we're just gonna paint in these rock shapes. It's almost like it's this yellowish sandstone, but parts of it have been shaved off and weathered and just turned dark gray over the years. That's what it looks like to me anyway. So wherever I see lighter values, I'm just painting around those. It's that negative painting technique, so important in watercolor. And that's why I painted that tan, dark brownish undertone. I want to leave it exposed while I paint the second layer. Yeah, so we're starting to see the nature and character of this rock coming out already. Switching to more of a brownish tone, which means just a little more burnt sienna in my mix. Pulling that into the shadow. When I work fast in nature like this, I do tend to get more backwashes than when I'm in a more controlled studio space. But that's just because I'm having to make really quick decisions. And that's okay, you can make that part of your painting. Make that part of the expectation and the process and the wonder and fun and play of this whole process. Scraping that dark, continuing to pull it across the composition. There's these wonderful streaks of dark coming down, almost like waterfalls cascading down the side of the rock. Pull those in as well. I had to get out here really early because lately it's been 100 degrees during the day. Right now it's a pleasant 75 or so, 78, comfortable, and but it's going to get rapidly hotter. So after I'm done with my painting, I'm gonna head back to the house and we're gonna go out on the boat. That's what you do when you're in Texas on a hot August day. But this is my kind of vacation, a little bit of painting, a little bit of activity, fun outdoor activity, and then lots of just great conversation and hanging with my favorite people. My husband's family's happy place, and it's become my happy place too. I just love it here. So many great memories. sure all of you have a place like that somewhere that's just a place full of memories, happy thoughts, times with people you love. That's really what makes it, right? It's not even the location, it's the people. It's so funny how it just carries right across the valley. So now that I've got my rocks done, I'm gonna touch up the water and really darken the reflection so that it matches better the rocks themselves. And again, use the dry brush technique to scrape my brush across the surface so that it looks like broken up, rippling water. And then where that big crack is in the rock, I want to create a reflection of that on the water. So kind of concentrating more of my paint to mirror what's happening just above. Noticing there's quite a bit of horizontals going on, so I'm adding some of those vertical rock shapes that are just cutting through. I think that looks nice. Coming back to this side and darkening this reflection as well. Okay, so what do I want to add to the water, if anything? I'm going to mix with some more ultramarine. Just do some quick horizontal brush strokes. It's a boat racing by. Love it. You all see people fishing early in the morning. Just signs of life everywhere. Lots of deer on my drive over here too. Sweet. Okay, I'm gonna actually lighten up this little shadow I put in earlier. It's a bit distracting to me and too blue compared to some of the other things that I did. So a little bit of lifting and then some burnt sienna over the top can really help tone that down. Yeah, and I think that's better. So what do we think? I think that was really fun. Thoroughly enjoyable experience. I'm so glad I did it. I want to dull down my watercolor a little bit more. It's just too blue. This is going to be bright. I'm going to take a quick wash of watered down burnt sienna. Just swipe it all over. Toning down that color. And you know, the fun thing about wetting the water again is I can add more reflections too if I want to. I can exaggerate the reflections. Did you know you can do that? Yes, you can. Yeah, I'm going to extend them down a little. I'm going to call that finished.